Hi, my name is Alex Moz, the head of educational grants and projects at the Association of Jewish Refugees, or AJR. I'm also the host of our podcast series, Kindertransport, Remembering and Rethinking. On behalf of all of us at the AJR, we're very pleased to once again be a sponsor of this year's Yom HaShoah event. It's sad that for the second year in a row, we have to do this event remotely rather than meeting in person. But I do wonder if maybe this online format does give us an opportunity to maybe do some things that we wouldn't otherwise be able to do if we were in person. I know at the AJR, we past year that might provoke some companies who took in Jewish refugees who had arrived on the Kindertransport.
I wonder what kind of people they were. Describe them to us.
University College in Leicester. He was an Anglo-Saxon scholar by education, but he believed very strongly in provincial universities. Leicester University was supported by local subscription. The citizens of Leicester simply paid for it themselves. When he went there and he got there, there were, I think, less than 100 undergraduates. He was the second headmaster close to Derby, was a bit younger than him, and a linguist. She spoke very good Italian and French. She was very active socially. She had organized relief for Basque children from the bombing of Guernica, and Basque children came to this country, and she looked after a group of them. My father was the chairman of a group that was concerned with German Jewish academics, and did what he could to bring people out by offering them jobs. I mean, distinguished professors of physics or chemistry or whatever would be offered a job as a lab assistant, as you had to do in order to get that person to come. The British government insisted on that. And then when nearly always, all these people were on their way to relations in America. So that there were a number of distinguished scientists who came through University College Leicester with menial jobs for a month or so before moving on. And it was in the course of that he was asked whether by the chief medical officer of Berlin, whether we could give a host to his two daughters, who were 13 and 11, who were on their way to their uncle in New York. And the idea was that they would be with us for maybe a couple of weeks, 3 weeks, and then they would get on a ship and go off to America, which of course he said yes to. In the event, of course, what actually happened was that the children arrived on the Kindertransport, the last Kindertransport, and 17 days later, I think, war broke out. And so my parents said, well, boys, I have two brothers, Richard, an actor you knew, and a younger brother, John, who died a few years ago. And she said, my mother said, well, here they go. They're going to be your sisters until the war is over.
How did you take to that, you and your brothers?
In a fairly matter-of-fact way, I think. I mean, and actually, having talked to Helga and Irene, their names were, they were 13 and 11, Irena and Helga Maria. They too were very matter-of-fact about the whole business. I mean, Helga was quite bouncy about it all. It was a big adventure. I think she'd too young to realize the significance of what was happening to her. Irene was much more aware of things and was more profoundly upset by what was happening.
Did they speak English?
Not at all, and we didn't speak German either. But it was extraordinary how quickly they discovered it. I mean, my parents came down. I remember very well when war broke out, and I remember my father. It's moving for me to think about it now, but my dear father and my mother standing by the radio and listening to Chamberlain, to the Prime Minister, saying, and now we are at war with Germany. And my mother turned to the three of us, because I have a younger brother, and the two Bayachs, and said, well, now we are one family. And Irene and Helga will be your sisters now until such time as the war is over.
Extraordinary generosity of spirit.
Well, looking at it now and looking at it from an adult's point of view, I agree. I mean, and the experience, of course, I mean, people say nice things. Jewish people say nice things to me about our hospitality, but of course it was nothing to do with us. I mean, it was my parents, and they said that, and they said, we are now one family. You now have two sisters, and they will be with us until it's over.
You have reunited with them fairly recently.
I mean, they really were our sisters, as it were, and until they left. And they left 17 days after they arrived, the war started, and they left, I think, 2 years after, so that they were through a very sensitive time. I mean, Helga was 11 and was 17 when she left, and Irene was 20 when she left.
Wow. I just find that interview with Sir David to be remarkable. I mean, on the one level, just the clarity of his memories is quite something. The impact that these two essentially sisters of his made on his life has stuck with him for so many years, and that says something. I also find what he is describing to be interesting on another level as well, which is about where the Kindertransport sits in our collective memory exactly. So many people, I think of the Kindertransport as being somehow separate from the events of the Shoah. It's almost like a parallel history to what we know went on the continent. And of course, it is a very different strand of history. But when we hear Sir David talking about the moment when the sisters learned the fate of their parents, you realize that brought the realities of the Shoah into the Attenborough family's living room. And that is representative of so many other living rooms throughout Britain in mainstream British culture and society. And it challenges our idea of these things being somehow separate, that they are unavoidably linked together. I want to show you another clip. This one is from an event that we did to commemorate Holocaust Memorial Day just a few months ago. At that event, one of the things that the AJR was looking to do was to highlight our work with the second, third, and subsequent generations of survivors and refugees. And one of the featured components of that Holocaust Memorial Day commemoration online was a conversation between AJR member and survivor Stephen Frank and his granddaughter Maggie. They were talking about a trip that the two of them took together a few years ago to Stephen's hometown where he grew up of Amsterdam, but it also included visits to Terezin and Auschwitz-Birkenau. And it's really moving to see a grandfather and a granddaughter sharing this story and recalling the time that they spent together. Here, have a look.
Well, that's right. I mean, it was very interesting for me to do something like this with you. You know, you're the up and coming generation, and I'm the sort of outgoing generation. Unfortunately, some of the places that I wanted to revisit when we were in Theresienstadt, they changed all the names now, of course, because it is, after all, a Czech town. So all the street names are in Czech, which makes it extremely difficult, because when I was there, of course, all the street names were in German. And when we went to have a look at the children's home where I was, in fact, we couldn't find it. It looked as if it had been actually demolished and turned into a car park. But we did see the tunnel where I worked, or the entrance to the tunnel where I worked, and moved the ashes of the dead right near the end of the war. We saw that, and that was a sort of pretty grim reminder of what it was like. And of course, as you got nearer the end of the war, it got worse, didn't it? So what did you think about all that?
It was quite horrific to see that when you put the story and the scenes together, it made it worse, because it was like, you remember that tunnel as passing the ashes along from the dead, and so do quite a few other people, whereas people today will just go through that tunnel like nothing's there. They're just completely unaware. It might even be their favorite tunnel, whereas you have that memory of the place. And it's not upsetting that they demolished the camp, but I feel like they should have kept a bit more of it so that people from today can now understand what you went through in a deeper sense.
Yeah. And I can remember when we walked together on the railway line into Eisenstadt, that very railway line that brought me there in a cattle truck. And, you know, the different feelings that, of course, I had of walking on that railway track as opposed to the feelings that you had.
Yeah.
That was something quite different. And then, of course, you know, I mean, I was the lucky one. I was the one that survived, because after that, we went on to Auschwitz, and we went by taxi to Auschwitz. And, you know, we went by taxi to Auschwitz, and all those other people we know went in cattle trucks.
Thank you, Stephen and Maggie. You know, at the beginning of this session, I mentioned that maybe doing online events gives us some opportunities to do some things that we wouldn't be able to do at in-person events. Every year, the AJR hosts a commemorative ceremony to mark the anniversary of the November pogrom, or Kristallnacht. This year, because it was an online event, of course, we were able to have one of our speakers speaking to our members and others who tuned in from the Stad Temple in Vienna. That's Vienna's main historic synagogue. The speaker was Hannah Lessing from the Austrian National Fund. She spoke a lot about the fund's work and about the importance of challenging anti-Semitism. And then one thing I wasn't expecting was for her to share a very personal story towards the end of her remarks. And it was so powerful, I just wanted to share it with you today.
The memory of Kristallnacht leaves a bitter taste of loss, fear, and dislocation. From the ashes of over 150 synagogues destroyed in Austria, we can only salvage fragments of the past. Today, on this special occasion, I would like to share with you a very personal story I experienced 5 years ago. It is the story of the Rimonim that forges a personal connection back to that night. In the 1930s, my ancestors, Bertha and David Lessing, dedicated a pair of silver Torah finials, Rimonim, to their temple. They were antique, originating from the 19th century, the Biedermeier period. Their son Heinrich had died at a young age, and the Rimonim were a votive gift in memory of this beloved child. I imagine how much these Rimonim must have meant to his grieving parents. Then, the Nazis burned the temple down and looted the ritual objects, among them the Rimonim. They were lost without a trace in the turmoil of history. Decades later, one day in 2015, the former president of the Vienna's Jewish community told me about a pair of Rimonim he had seen in an Israeli auction catalog. Hannah, these Rimonim bear the name of Lessing. Don't you think they might come from your family? That's how I, by pure chance, learned of their existence. But maybe nothing happens just by chance. As we would say in Yiddish, it was bashert. So in March 2015, I went to Israel to retrieve the Rimonim and bring them home to Vienna. 77 years had passed since they had been looted during the night of broken glass. With this, my father, as usual, didn't say very much.
The Holocaust. And it seems to me that, I say this with no difficulty whatsoever, that the uniqueness, and I must emphasize this, that there is an ongoing challenging conversation about placing the Holocaust in the context of different genocides. Somebody, I think, once described it helpfully as a volcano in a dark landscape, but it's uniqueness as it confronts modernity, that sense of, as I repeat what I said earlier, about us descending as we can so easily from our complacency of a liberal democracy into that because of that, its urgency demands of us that it's taught in every school and not as part of the curriculum where young learners get the chance to choose or to opt out of it, as often they do. So in some cases, as you'll be aware, Michael, and some educators listening to this will be aware, it's only taught, for example, once somebody decides to take on history, GCSE or A-level, for example. It seems to me that this should be part courage and responsibility of each individual learner to stand up on the side of right and never to be assured that just because we can vote in elections that we can't descend into human depravity. And now more than ever, it seems to me that we have an overwhelming, evident need to make that part of the tapestry of everybody's education, it seems to me, cautiously, carefully, and of course within reason, from the moment that young learners end up in secondary school.
What Rob was doing there was dipping his toe into the waters of a long-standing, I don't want to say debate, but ideological discussion that's been going on for at least a generation now, I'd say, about what is the purpose of teaching and learning about the Holocaust. Is it simply because it happened? It was the defining event of the 20th century, and young people need to learn about that. And because we need to remember those 6 million who perished for their own sake? Or is it for something broader than that, that we learn about the Holocaust to teach us about something else as well, like about the role of individuals in society, about citizenship? And I think Rob did such a brilliant job of balancing those two things. I think probably the purpose is somewhere in the middle of those, and he very articulately, I think, explained one way of framing what the purpose of teaching and learning about the Holocaust could be. One final clip I want to show you was from an event that we hosted that looked at contemporary anti-Semitism. So I want to finish this session, again, looking forward about the contemporary relevance of the Shoah and why we are still learning about it and talking about it. On this panel, we had Lord Mann, Lord John Mann, Lord Ian Austin, and Karen Pollack, Chief Executive of the Holocaust Educational Trust. And as part of that panel, Karen had the following to say about allyship, about those who are challenging anti-Semitism and what they can do in regards to other forms of prejudice as well.
One of the lessons, if you like, whether we're talking about Labour and anti-Semitism or we're talking about anti-Semitism and racism in general, I really believe in allyship. I really believe that we have to educate each other, understand each other, that we can't be an insular community and only understand ourselves. We have to understand others, and we have to build bridges. And we need other communities to know that we are also on their side, that just like we want people to stand with us against anti-Semitism, we also stand with them against whether it's prejudice against whichever group. I really believe it. And I think something I would say, coming back to the work that I do on a more regular basis at the Trust, is that we work with young people, and they are from all walks of life, from all across the country, the majority of whom are not Jewish, and most of them haven't met a Jewish person in their life until they hear from a Holocaust survivor in a school, or when they get more involved with us as an organization. And what I really sort of am inspired by is that they just think, as decent people, that we should remember. They think, as decent people, we should remember the individuals that were murdered, but also say no to anti-Semitism today. And they've got no reason to, they've got no obligation, but just because they get it. And I think that should be a positive message in that we can talk, you know, the theme is to talk about anti-Semitism.
Have a good day, but I do hope that you have a thought-provoking and maybe similar. The AJR, as many of you may know, but some might not, provides social welfare services for Holocaust survivors and refugees. And if you know anyone who could benefit from our services, please do get in touch. On behalf of all of us at the AJR, thank you for tuning into this session, and we very much hope to see you very soon in person, if at all possible. Thank you.